This seminar is hosted by the Tax Law and Policy Research Program in the Melbourne Centre for Commercial Law. Thanks very much for joining us. It's sort of part of the Centre's general research seminar series, and it's really exciting that we've started to open up and actually have people visit us in this country, including Professor Buchanan, who I've known for many years. So before we start, I'd like to acknowledge that we're on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, especially on a day like today when the constitutional amendment for the voice has been announced formally by the Prime Minister with the wording for a constitutional amendment to recognise Australia's First Peoples. So that's very exciting news. On this day then, we're going to have a research seminar about social security, retirement, savings, superannuation and inequality, I guess, in writ large. This issue of retirement saving, public approaches to funding retirement, private savings for retirement is something that is an issue around the world. It's an issue in the United States, where Professor Buchanan is from, as well as here in Australia. It's a topic of substantial policy debate. And it's really useful, I think, in this context to get a sense of a perspective from the US, which is both kind of theory and policy rich, and also sort of knowledgeable about the distributional and the population aging elements. So I know that Neil Buchanan has written about this over the years. So we distributed to people who registered a paper from a few years ago, published a few years ago by Neil, which might be of interest. And I think Neil's going to make some connections to the Australian superannuation context as well. So I'm the director of the Centre for Melbourne Centre for Commercial Law and the Tax Program. Let me say something about Professor Neil Buchanan, who is the James J. Freeland Eminent Scholar, Chair in Taxation at the University of Florida Levin College of Law. The University of Florida Levin College is one of the top tax schools in the United States for tax law and policy study and research. So Neil is based there, but he historically was elsewhere at George Washington, I think it is, in Washington, DC. In the US, he's travelled widely around the world, frequently visiting other universities and teaching elsewhere as well, and has a connection to the University of Cambridge, where he is something called an external trustee of the Cambridge Student Union. I don't know what that is, but it sounds very important. So Neil's nationally and internationally known for his work on intergenerational justice and tax issues more generally, and for looking at retirement savings and pensions sort of in that context, together with a range of other ways of thinking about tax law and policy, and connecting it to politics and to democracy as well. He has qualifications in law, which he came to relatively late, but previously in economics, in a PhD in economics from Harvard University, and in laws from Monash University in Australia, where he has a long-standing connection. So welcome, Neil. I think what's going to happen is you're going to step into frame, if you're not in the frame already, and take over, and also at some point show us a video, which we'll manage when we get to that. So, welcome. So now you'll tell us, we've got Avril here in the room helping us out. Thank you, Avril. Neil's there now. So what I'm going to do, and we'll see if this works, is we'll stop. I'll just turn off this screen here. Now, how is that looking from your perspective? Neil, you've got a whiteboard behind you if you want that.
Okay.
And please go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Miranda. Thank you, Avril, for making this all work. It's certainly, I would not have been able to do it. And thanks to all of you who are zooming in. Thanks to those of you in the room. I really appreciate Miranda introducing me and hosting me. I was originally going to be here for half a term, and then it cut down to a month. This is not by Melbourne's fault. It's by what chaos happening in my life, it was then cut down to a month and then cut down to 2 weeks. Even the particular weeks changed, and Miranda miraculously managed to move things around and make today happen. So I can at the very least thank her by offering an unpaid promotional announcement of her book, Tax and Government in the 21st Century, which I am planning to read on the long flight back to the US in a couple of weeks, and then write a review to be published in May. Okay, so many of you probably have heard me speak before, because I have given a number of keynotes at ATA and a couple of other things. So at this point, many of you would know that I tend to be somewhat a stream of consciousness kind of speaker. I will try to discipline myself a little bit, but I will start with an anecdote. I think it was 2017. I was the ATAX fellow at UNSW, and I took a long flight out to Perth, much longer than I expected. You know, Americans have no sense at all of how big this is. So after the 5-hour flight, I was giving a talk at one of the universities in Perth, and I said something, and I tried to do a good job of softening the blow, because what I wanted to say was that the United States isn't wrong about everything, and in particular, I was saying that the American approach to retirement is superior to the Australian approach. And I said, you know, I don't mean to be a, you know, USA, America first, all that kind of thing. But, you know, facts are facts. And I, you know, assessed the situation, and it was my conclusion that the American approach was better than the Australian approach. The dean of that law school, whose name I don't recall, and I wouldn't share even if I did. I don't know if this idiom translates, but he blew a gasket, and basically would not allow for the possibility that the United States could do anything right. And I said, you know, really, this is the only thing that I'm going to stand on. But I really do find it interesting to compare the current Australian system with the American system. So again, even though and Miranda highlighted this, even though the title of this is Financing Social Security in the United States, I do want to be a bit comparative here. But start with the Social Security system. And for those of you who had a chance or might have a chance in the future to read the long American length law review, that's one thing we do very long, by the way. The ridiculously long law review articles. You will see that I'm drawing heavily from that. But I want to make, I want to force myself to be a little bit organized here. So I'm going to make 4 points, I guess. So one is that the Social Security system is solvent. We'll see why in a minute. I need to make that affirmative statement. Second, Social Security is inadequate. Third, switching to private savings accounts is deeply problematic. And fourth is what I'll call asymmetric adjustment costs. And I'll describe what is asymmetric here. Where the asymmetry is what two things are being compared. So the reason I start with Social Security as solvent is because it's not just a partisan divide in the United States, but if you read just what are purported to be news articles, you know, they're not supposed to be opinion pieces. You will frequently see in the Washington Post, the New York Times, you know, they're really the top public news sources. They'll just say things like, oh, you know, Social Security solvency is either, you know, deeply endowed, or they'll just say it's insolvent. And so that's just not true. I mean, and it's doubly upsetting because at most it's arguable but wrong. But if you want to say it's arguable but wrong, say that. Don't say, oh, everybody knows. But you know, but that it's being presented in a non-opinion form, I think is very bad, which makes it all the more surprising that the politics this year, just this calendar year, have turned in a direction that I like, that I'm very happy with. In January, the annual President's State of the Union address happened, and I assume that some of this made international news because the Republicans were booing President Biden. And in particular, they got very exercised when he said correctly that some, not all, Republicans had proposed privatizing Social Security. And although I don't think that Biden was setting a trap, effectively he did, because basically they all said, no, we didn't do that. And then he said, oh, you don't want to do that? Great, let's not privatize Social Security. And everybody kind of went, wait, what just happened? And so the result of this was that even though we're having some technical difficulties.
Go for it before. Keep going now.
Okay. I feel like I'm at a rock concert. Sibilance. Yeah. So the net result of this is that even though there's this conventional wisdom that Social Security is insolvent, all of a sudden we got like 99.99% of everybody agreeing that we're not going to touch Social Security. So that's good. And let me give you another example of how sort of of how ubiquitous this misunderstanding is. So just this afternoon, I was looking up some statistics, and NASDAQ, the financial services company, has a website, and they were presenting there, and I'll run through some of the statistics in a minute, but they were presenting their results of survey data with people saying how much they expected to rely on Social Security versus their own private savings. And so the result was that 23% of Americans were expecting not to rely on Social Security, but instead to rely on private savings. Now, to be clear, my immediate thought on that was, oh, those are the rich people, right? You know, like like who would answer that question? I don't expect to rely on Social Security. My answer would be people who don't need to rely on Social Security. You know, people who have several million, if not more, dollars in their retirement savings accounts, or just anywhere. You know, they have large assets. But here's what NASDAQ said. Other respondents have less hope for the program, as 23% stated they are not counting on Social Security at all. And I read that and I thought, I guess, you know, maybe that 23% includes, you know, people who have bought into the insolvency net. But I thought it was fascinating that, again, this is supposed to be a neutral news source that was saying this. So let me explain why it's a myth. So the Social Security system, if it weren't for the baby boom, the Social Security system would have continued to be what we call a pay-as-you-go, a pay-go system. Pay-go system. Where the idea is that on an annual basis, revenues equal expenditures. Right, so if you're running a pay-as-you-go system, then what you're saying is, all right, I'm going to set it up so that the amount of money that I'm taking in from payroll taxes, from current workers, they're the ones who are getting payroll, will equal the amount of expenditures that the system says current beneficiaries are set to receive. And so that's a pay-as-you-go system. If you have a pay-as-you-go system, you don't need anything else. You don't need to have a trust fund. You don't need to have a separate account. You don't need to do anything. When the baby boom came along, this presented some challenges, but also some temptations. And so the baby boom was basically set up in a way that early on, and by the way, at least in the United States, and a few years ago, I looked at Australia's numbers, and I think your baby boom was about as big as ours. And so, like, I happen to have been born on right in the peak of the baby boom. But the birth rates in the peak of the baby boom were literally double what they had been in the 1930s. Right? I mean, we're not talking about like a several percent. I mean, we're talking doubling. And what that meant was that by the time the baby boom reached early adulthood, if you had a pay-as-you-go system, you've got all these people paying payroll taxes, your revenues could be huge. You don't have that many retirees because, you know, that's my parents and grandparents. That generation was sort of thinned out by World War II as one example, but also they had lower birth rates anyway. And so the pay-as-you-go system could have been set up in a way where we could have said, oh, we've got way too many revenues that we're going to be bringing in for decades while the baby boom is working its way through life. And so we can just cut payroll taxes and we'll continue to be on an annual basis balanced. Or we could have said, hey, our parents won World War II, let's treat them better. And we could have given them a big set of expenditures. But the surprising thing is that we actually did the opposite. We kept benefits about the same, expenditures about the same, and we raised payroll taxes. So we were bringing in literally over the space of the working lifetime of the baby boom in the United States, something on the order of $2 trillion more than the system needed. And the idea was that you were then going to, that basically there was this thing called the trust fund. The trust fund was going to be an accounting mechanism. The accounting mechanism was going to say, okay, how much did the baby boom overpay? How much more did they pay in than was necessary? And then when it gets to the point where there's relatively more retirees and relatively fewer workers, then we draw that down. Okay? Now, I explained in the paper that Miranda circulated that there's an underlying economic reality there that I don't want to spend time on now. But the point is that we've now reached the point where, mostly because of inequality, growing inequality in wages across the United States, it turns out that, and this has been going on for over 40 years. Because of that, the way the benefit structure and the tax structure of Social Security is set up, it's possible, not certain, but it's possible that the trust fund will reach zero, right? Which means that the baby boom will have used up all the credits that we accumulated. Right? That it'll reach zero sooner than we would have liked. And if that happens, then we will need to adjust benefits going forward, or we will need to decide to supplement with other tax revenues. And so if you get back to the point where there's no more trust fund balance to use, then you're back on a pay-go. Or you say, well, you know, we don't want to cut benefits. And by the way, the cut would be on the order of something like 20%. So we're not talking about zero or, you know, like 100% cut, which is, you know, part of the, oh, Social Security is not going to be there for you, right? That kind of thing. So kind of worst case is that the system will pay 80% rather than 100%, but 80% or 100% of what, right? Most people don't even know what the system would give them. There's an online calculator, but most people don't know about it or use it. But the point is that when we talk about the system being insolvent or solvent, the system can pay exactly what the law requires. Because the way the law is written, it says, okay, if you don't supplement, then the benefits are 80% of this, or not artificial exactly, but legislatively set number. And if you don't want to pay that, then if you don't want to find extra funds to pay that, then the law requires you to pay the lower number. But then, even if you go to that, I don't think we ever would, to be honest with you, for reasons that I can answer during Q&A if it's of interest. But if we ever reach that point, then we're forevermore back on pay-go. Right. So when people say, "Oh, the trust fund's going to go to zero," which means the system's bankrupt, which means Social Security is going to be gone, which is what that NASDAQ thing sort of suggested, then that's just crazy. That's just completely at odds with the underlying reality. So Social Security is solvent, both in a technical sense and in the sense of it'll be there. It might not be as much as you would think if you went to the website and saw what the formula would tell you you would get based on your earnings history, but it's still there. But point number two, it's not enough. Okay, so let me just give you a sense of the numbers there. Okay, so there's a range of benefits that you can receive that depend on, in part on when you retire, because you have the choice of whether to retire as early as age 62 or as late as age 70. For completely artificial reasons, we say that there's a what's called a full retirement age, which had been 65 but has been raised to 67. But in any case, the earlier you start taking benefits, the lower your monthly benefit, because there's a trade-off. And then you also your benefits are determined by your earnings history. There's a very simple, straightforward. Oh, I'm an economist, so it counts as simple to me. But anyway, it's the kind of thing that it doesn't even take a particularly good spreadsheet to get this to compute that. But in any case, the current maximum benefit, if somebody was retiring this year, and this is all in US dollars, so multiplied by 50% roughly to get an Australian equivalent. So the maximum benefit today is, and these are monthly numbers, $41.94 for people who wait to age 70, $33.45 a month for people who currently the adjustment has it that somebody who's 66 now, I think it's 66 in 4 months because there's a transition, but it's basically age 66. And then what's the lowest number? 2364. If you can't wait and start taking it at age 62.
So the maximum benefit there, I need to repeat this. I'm not sure if people will hear it, but so 4,094 a month.
Yes.
So about 50,000
right.
a year.
About 50,000 a year.
So that's a lot more than our age,
Yeah,
than our maximum.
yeah. So when I say it's inadequate, I don't mean it relatively to other countries. I mean it relatively to keeping people out of poverty. But remember, this is the maximum benefit. So somebody who made, and this gets adjusted every year, somebody who made the inflation adjusted equivalent of 160,000 a year or more for their entire life would qualify for these. Okay, so then what is the average? And here I'll just give the average at the full retirement age. In 2022 was 1,657. And that translates to almost exactly 20,000 a year. Okay, and so so this is what I think of when I say that our system is inadequate, right? I mean, if you are one of the lucky people who's making, in Australian dollar terms, $240,000 a year, then you're probably going to be one of the people who has a lot of private saving anyway, but you're also going to be getting, looking at these numbers. You're also most likely to be one of the people who can wait. So as Miranda was pointing out, you can wait to age 70, supplement whatever else you've got is in terms of your assets and retirement income with another 50,000 a year from Social Security. But it's this part that I'm worried about, right? When I say it's inadequate. And the reason I'm worried is because, as we'll talk about, for many people, this is it. This is all they're going to rely on. But in addition, $20,000 a year is above the poverty level. And one of the things that's worth repeating every time I give a talk about this subject, the Social Security system was a wildly successful social program, probably the most successful social program in history, right? Because when it was started in 1935, it was started directly in response to the middle of the Great Depression. And the people who had savings, it had been wiped out by the bank failures. And a lot of people didn't have savings anyway. So elder poverty in the United States was an enormous problem. Social Security all but solved that, right? So unfortunately, there are still some elders living in poverty in the United States, but the poverty rate among elders is single digits for sure. And of course, this is one of those things where you can't win even if you win, because now the politicians who oppose Social Security are saying, oh, look, we're doing so many good things for elders, but children have higher poverty rates. Yeah, but that doesn't mean you put elders back in poverty. It drives me nuts. But in any case, we're looking at something that is adequate but barely. And that's why I say inadequate, right? I mean, this is really something that should be supplemented.
So just to give you a comparison, again, the maximum rate of the Australian age pension is actually 27,600 Australian dollars a year. That converts to about 30,000 Australian dollars. So our maximum pension rate is lower than the average Social Security.
Yeah, and thank you for that, because that really supports where I'm going.
I'm not sure.
That supports where I'm going with this. I was just given a stage direction to get back into frame. But yeah, so there are some discussions in the United States to increase funding to make sure that 20% cut doesn't happen in the next decade, but also to just generally raise the retirement support that people receive. So then the question is, what about private accounts? So I said here, switching to private accounts is deeply problematic. And let me give you a sense of that. So this is where I compare the US and Australia more directly, because I'm not telling this audience anything. You switched over to private saving. It's very highly regulated and structured private saving. But it's supposed to be, you know, it's your individual account that, you know, you direct, and it's all about freedom, I guess. And so the super system is supposed to be allowing you to save for your own future rather than relying on big government. Let me just point out, and with this audience, again, this is hardly news. Private accounts don't put their money in a vault, right? I mean, you know, you'll get a lot of politicians saying, "Oh, well, where is the money that Social Security is going to pay?" Oh, it's, you know, like, oh, it's pay-go. Like, you know, we took it in and we immediately sent it out to current retirees. There's no money there. Well, what do you think banks do? Right? You know, you deposit your money, and they keep the legally minimum required amount, and they send it all out. And if they're going to be able to pay you your withdrawals when you want your withdrawal, then they are counting on their loans performing. Okay, we had an experience last week, and the effects of which are ongoing, where you say, well, what happens if private financial institutions suddenly don't have enough money to, you know, and we're back to Jimmy Stewart and It's a Wonderful Life, and, you know, and runs on banks. One of my favorite scenes in movies, because it's actually about economics law, and it's in black and white. So what could be better? But in any case, the result of switching to private accounts is that the reason for that digression was to say, it doesn't take you from a system where the money is hypothetical to a system where the money is there, right? In neither a pay-go system or a private account system is the money there, right? The money has been promised under legal promises in the future, and legal promises sometimes are deliberately violated, and other times they can't be met because of things like Silicon Valley Bank. And so the issue is that if you want to switch to private accounts, then you need to have a reason to do it that's not this completely fake, well, that's real money. That's my money. And so the super system has always fascinated me. And so at this point, I wanted to show a video. It's like a 4.5-minute video, and I'm going to force you all to watch it all the way to the end. I'm telling you in advance, this is cringy, okay? But I have to show it.
NZ presents Superannuation Explained. It's okay, I didn't know either.
Liana! The way that I was mid-spiral and you just appeared out of nowhere.
It's magic.
It's your special talent,
Magic.
isn't it? Okay, actually, while you're here, can you please help me upskill in superannuation? First question, what's the deal?
Well, superannuation is how you ensure a comfy lifestyle in retirement.
Comfy. I see what you did there. Your mind is powerful.
So super is where your employer pays a minimum of 10.5% into an investment fund throughout your working life. And it's the law. If you're a freelancer or self-employed, you may need to pop that money in yourself, and that amount is actually going to go up to 12% by 2025.
Backtrack a bit. All I heard was the fact that I'm an investor. Am I investing?
Yeah. So you're investing in your own retirement.
But how do I make sure that I've got enough super for, you know, the lavish lifestyle that I so desperately deserve?
Such a good question, Louis. You're definitely not alone in wondering that. So there are 4 C's that I hope can help you out. Connect.
Connect.
Consolidate.
Consolidate.
Contribute.
Contribute.
And consider.
Consider. Okay.
So the first, connect with your super fund by jumping online, logging into your fund, even calling them directly and finding out how your super's performing, what your balance is, how it's invested. You've got to know what you're working with if you want to grow it. Number 2, do you remember number 2?
Yeah.
Consolidate.
I was just going to say consolidate. I was like, and you took the words right out of my mouth. Yeah.
So if you've changed jobs a couple of times, you might have 2 or 3 super funds floating about. Consolidating them could make them grow more over time because you could be saving in fees. It's really easy to do via the ATO, and they'll send you a list of any links.
Enjoy a couple cocktails on a cruise from time to time. Got
For
it.
sure.
Old me will still have it.
Yes.
The synchronicity.
So number 3, contribute extra. The more you put in early, the more it will grow and the more you will have at retirement to provide you with that lifestyle. So if you have extra cash you don't need, you could put more into a super fund instead of a savings account. Remember, cocktails.
Cocktails on the beach.
Yeah. So you can earn more interest, your funds will grow more over time if you put more into the fund. Plus those extra contributions could be tax deductible to you. Just make sure you do your research.
And the 4th C.
Consider your options. Ultimately, this is your investment, so it's important to know where it's going. There are lots of different super funds out there with different fees, different investment options, different insurance, different ethics. There are a lot of different factors to consider when picking a super fund. So make sure you do your research and pick what's right for you.
This has been so helpful. And I'm not spiraling anymore. But where can one go if they don't have an ANZ expert, Liana Couchy, sitting beside them on a reclining couch, you know?
Well, I'd jump back to the first C.
Okay,
Do you remember what that was?
back to the beginning.
Yeah, so
next question.
So connect.
Connect.
So jump online, log into your super fund, even call them and just ask them a few questions over the phone. You could also go to anz.com/superlearning to access some great content to help you on this journey and make the most of your super at any age. It's really straightforward once you get started.
Some might say super straightforward. If you found this video helpful, go on, subscribe to our channel. I need you, I'm lonely. And watch me as I upskill in a whole lot of other financial wellbeing topics. Oh, and don't forget to check the links in the description for some more handy resources. Shall we get comfy?
Sure.
Okay. Oh my God, this goes all the way back. Oh, I'm floating on a cloud. Oh, I'm floating on a cloud. Sleep in 3, 2, 1.
I guarantee you that there are American videos that are easily that cringy. But the reason I wanted you to watch it, this actually just popped up on my feed. It popped up on my feed when I got to Melbourne. I just turned on the TV in my rental apartment, and this thing from ANZ, or not ANZ, popped up, and I watched it and I thought, oh, perfect. Now, to me, the most interesting part of the video was twice in the middle, where she says, in this sort of la-di-da fashion, just do your research. And I just thought, oh, come on. And so I went back and I looked, I had written a couple of essays about this, about super, actually, back in 2017 when I was at UNSW. And I wrote down something in one of those. Yeah, there's something that maybe you all have heard of called National Financial Literacy Strategy. Is that familiar? Okay. So this was a paper that Tony Chardon, Mark Brimble, and Brett Freudenberg wrote, I think 7 or 8 years ago, that I had looked at, and I thought, that's ambitious, right? I mean, I don't run a tax clinic, but I know people who do. And the idea of getting people financially literate enough to even just fill out the very simple tax forms that Americans, the lower income Americans need to fill out, is a Sisyphean task. And so when I watched that ANZ video that I just inflicted on you, I thought, well, we're now, 8 years on from when I had, from when Brad and his co-authors wrote that. And I thought, ANZ has to pay 2 people and a crew to produce a video that's that basic. Because apparently national financial literacy is not going as well as it needs to go. And if you think about what's happening here, so these are direct costs of having a system where you give people freedom to be, as Louis said in the video, I'm an investor, right? Yeah, but I've seen the investment choices in the super funds, and for very good reasons, they're very restricted options. And as I guess Liana was explaining, you know, the funds have differences on their ethics and on this and on that, which American conservatives would now call woke. Everything's woke now, apparently. But the idea there is that you are not just talking about the government spending money on this national financial literacy program, but banks bothering to spend money to try to get people to work through things that they're just not inclined to do. Right? I looked up. There's an economist named Sendhil Mullainathan. I'm probably mispronouncing that. But anyway, he's a superstar. Right? He was junior faculty at MIT, stolen from MIT with tenure from Harvard. Harvard lost him to University of Chicago. Right? I mean, like this guy is at the top of the heap. And he wrote an interesting column in the New York Times in 2015 in which he said, "I have no idea what I'm doing when I invest my funds for retirement." He likened it to the nightmare where you are taking a final exam in a class that you never attended and didn't study for. This is a guy with sterling economic credentials, and he's saying, I don't know. And he then did a bunch of research, and it turns out that even if you really, really, really educate yourself, you're like, maybe I think I've got a strategy, but then he looked into it and like, yeah, even that doesn't. And so, what are the consequences of this? So one consequence is, some people are going to make bad decisions. So rather than just everybody getting $20,000, not everybody, but the average person getting $20,000 a year, as we do under Social Security in the US, you've got a range of outcomes. And as Miranda pointed out, the averages aren't even this high. And so the range is going to include putting people in real trouble. And other than, as I understand it, you have basically a means-tested income support program just in general.
When I say the age pension, that's what I'm.
Oh, you are? Okay. Okay. Even so, that's worse news for Aussies, if I'm understanding it correctly.
Yeah, if you have no super and you're only relying on the age pension, you get less than.
You get less than that. There you go. Okay, good. Thank you for clarifying. Yeah, so and this is all in the context of, but we're giving you power to take control of your financial future. And so the best estimate is that and this leaves out the amount of time that Aussies are supposed to be spending becoming literate, right? These estimates don't include that. We're just talking about direct expenditures of funds. The Australian super system costs 1% annually of your funds on deposit. You say 1%, is that a big number or is it a small number? Well, in the US, it's 0.5%. By in the US, I mean in the Social Security system, it has administrative costs as well. But what it doesn't have is marketing costs. You don't have to do those silly videos, right? And and so there's a whole bunch of expenditures that are unnecessary. And this is just comparing to this constricted set of choices that you have. I mean, when I talk about switching to private accounts, I also teach a class called deferred compensation. Because on top of Social Security, the United States Congress over decades has really lavished tax expenditures on retirement saving. But because of growing inequality, the only people who can afford to take advantage of that are the wealthiest people. And so to give you a sense of how badly skewed this is, okay, 4% of, let's see, so this is not going to be on screen if I look to the left, so I will do it this way. So this is statistics on how much money people have in total in their retirement accounts above and beyond Social Security. So 4% of people have between 200,000 and 350,000 total. 4%, another 4% have between 350 and 500. And 5% have 500,000 or more. Which means 87% have under 200,000. That's not going to be their annual payout. That is the total that they have. Which means that the supplementing of the 20,000 a year is pretty minimal. And so that's where that NASDAQ survey comes in. 50% of the people plan on covering all or most of their retirement from Social Security. That's people who are being honest with themselves now. Right? You know, there's some remainder of the other 50% who are just kidding themselves. And so the comparison here is that we're saying, well, if Social Security in the U.S. is inadequate, well, we've got all these tax subsidized private savings retirement vehicles, and boy, are they expensive, right? The U.S. Treasury, I'm betting yours does as well, but the U.S. Treasury has an annual tax expenditure budget. And which basically says how much tax revenue are we losing for various things. There are three big tax subsidies in the U.S. One is for housing, one is for healthcare, and we get what we get on healthcare for that. So even with all the hundreds of billions of dollars that we put into our healthcare system, it's a famously horrible healthcare system. But then the third one is retirement savings. And it's on the order of something like $300 billion a year, which is something like 10% of the federal budget, 8% of the federal budget, for subsidizing retirement saving, almost all of which goes to people who make more than $250,000 a year. Okay, so so switching to private accounts, or the current reliance on private accounts is already problematic. The way Australia does private accounts is problematic for a different set of reasons. But if the American politician that Joe Biden was specifically calling out was, I currently live in Florida. None of my nationally known political figures are anything but an embarrassment. So one of them is Senator Rick Scott, and he's the one who wants to completely privatize Social Security. Just transition it over to nothing but private accounts. And I guarantee you, they wouldn't even have the guardrails that Super does. And so the idea of switching to private accounts is deeply problematic. Now, to go back to my angry dean from Perth, okay? I argued that you all made a mistake by switching to Super, and that you should switch back. And he was angry, and I get why. But this is what I mean by asymmetric. Okay, so it turns out that if you don't currently have a Social Security pay-go system, and you want to switch into it, which is what I'm suggesting Australia should do, that's actually easy. In fact, you get a bonus, which I'll describe in a minute. If you're already in a pay-go system and you want to switch out of it, it's really expensive. And I'll explain that now. The reason it's expensive is because the currently retired or near retired generations lived their lives in reliance on the idea that they were going to pay into the Social Security system, and the social contract said that when they retire, they'll get Social Security benefits. You can't tell a 64-year-old hey, screw you, pal, right? So if you want to switch out of a pay-as-you-go system, you've got a lot of people who you have to continue to support somehow. But you're also telling currently working generations, like, you're going to be on your own. You're going to be like Lewis. Nobody wants to be that. Just like that clueless. And so that generation, there's probably 2 generations in there, depending on how you count them. But those workers are going to have to simultaneously continue to pay taxes to support the retirements of people who acted in reliance on the continuation of Social Security and to save for themselves. Right? Basically, we're saying you get double taxed. We won't call the second part of it taxes, but that's what it is. We're saying, the government's going to stop doing something for you, and you're on your own now. So good luck. So that's where you don't have to worry about that, right? We would have to worry about that if the politicians who want to get rid of Social Security actually got their way. But from the standpoint of any country that currently has private accounts and wants to switch into a pay-as-you-go system, you can go back to when the US created Social Security in 1935, right? The first generation of beneficiaries basically got a freebie, right? Now they deserved it, right? Because otherwise they were literally dying in the streets. So it's not like they were living on that yacht and drinking the margaritas, but they were. It is absolutely true that they never paid into a Social Security system, and yet they were receiving benefits from a Social Security system. But once that generation died, everybody else is on the system. You pay in while you're working, and you take out while you're retired. And so any country that is currently set up on private accounts can make that transition in a way that, you could take the money that in the United States case went to impoverished elders in the 1930s and say, okay, so for the first generation, this is actually going to give us some extra money to work with, and just decide what to do with it. Or you could do it the way the US did it and have a bunch of people who, in some meaningful sense, don't deserve it, right? Didn't earn it, didn't pay into it, but that's how a pay-as-you-go system starts. But in any case, I don't expect that the Australian government is going to take my advice any more than the US government does, probably less. But what I do, one of the reasons I wanted to give this talk here, and I'm going to talk about similar issues at Griffith next week, is because I really would be interested. Miranda and I had some brief conversations about this over dinner the other day, lunch, dinner, breakfast. We had this really nice brunch. What was the name of the park?
Children's Farm.
Children's Farm Park. Beautiful place. I really don't want to leave. Please don't make me leave. But over one of the meals that we shared, we were discussing the way the Australian system works. And I'm sure I'm being more harsh about it than it probably deserves. There's probably a lot of nuance that I'm ignoring, but I don't do nuance. So I count on you all to tell me either by email or by asking questions now. I guess I've really gone on. So we have 10 minutes until officially it ends. So thank you for listening.
Okay, thanks very much, Neil. And I have to congratulate Neil on being like a television star talking to a green screen. A small audience here and an audience online, so thanks for that. We do have a little bit of time for questions. I've just got a couple of observations. I think the systems, it is interesting to consider that the systems are very different, but they do both have public and private elements, you could say. So in the US, your public element is this payroll Social Security fund with a long history, as you said. It's reassuring to know that it's not insolvent. I think I agree. And it's interesting to hear you talk about adequacy. because I impaired it. I'm not sure if people online could hear. The Australian age pension, so our public element of our system is not a fund, it's financed out of general tax. It's a mood-based payment. We call it Social Security, but it's not in that sense. And the maximum age pension, including pension supplement, so this is for people really at the bottom of the distribution, is less than certainly than your average in the Social Security system. So it's something for us to consider, and that's the age pension is almost our highest cash payment paid anyway. Unemployment is lower. Our private system is superannuation, of course, the contribution system, and you in the US, which you haven't talked about so much, is the IRA, the Roth IRAs, these retirement savings.
Right.
People have.
Those are all, that's all together what I was describing as the tax expenditure that lands on the
Right,
top.
which has highly concession.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to put the two together, but I think you're right. Like, I mean, I think the US system, the public system is a highly successful policy when I look at it.
Yeah.
It would be nice not to lose that. So I don't know if we do have any questions either in the room or online. In the room?
I was wondering from I listen to that private and public, but is there room for one where we have elements of both? And I think the thing about the Roth IRA stuff, like, I think I'm ready to accept that there are things that the US does well in terms of this. The fact that the average person is better off from that, but doesn't mean that there's no room for private accounts. Is that what you suggest?
Yeah, thank you for that. So the question,
Maybe just repeat.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
Hear it, because there are room mics on, but
Yeah.
maybe just.
yeah, so the question is there a mixed possibility of a mixture of both a public element and a private element? And I thank you for that question, because the answer is yes, but in a way that might surprise you. If we got rid of all of the tax subsidies that we have for IRAs and 401ks and 403bs and 457s and all the things that I teach. in my
These are the
class.
equivalent of superannuation.
Yeah,
More or less.
more or less, right? With all kinds of rules about, can you borrow against your balance, and how late can you delay? I mean, just crazy stuff. That's why it requires an advanced law school class to teach it. Well, good luck getting normal human beings to understand it. But again, that's like $300 billion of lost tax revenue a year. As regressive a tax expenditure as you can find, right? Now, what if we got rid of that? Relatively wealthy people aren't being prevented from saving. Right? So, if you look at even the higher number and think, I want to live on more than 50,000 a year, and I happen to be making $500,000 a year, then, savings accounts are there, mutual funds are there. So
You could buy shares, you could buy real property, you can invest in a business.
Exactly, there are a million ways that
Lots
people
of
can
things
invest.
you can do.
But the difference would be that we're not subsidizing you to do it. So if you say, I want to have more than Social Security when I retire, God go with you, right? I mean, it's really to me the only way to think about it. Now, and this sort of ties into something that Miranda reminded me of in her comments. Americans have been trained from the beginning of Social Security to imagine that it's actually a private account. And the reason is because this is very well documented in historical record. Right? Franklin Roosevelt was the president at the time, and he won an argument with his advisors. That would be hard for a president to do, and said, we are going to describe this as a system of private accounts. So we're going to say, you, the worker, will pay in, the money will be yours, and the government promises that you'll get it back with a rate of return in your retirement. And his advisors were saying, you're lying. And he said, I know, but that's really the most straightforward way to get people to understand what's going on here, because it doesn't, I mean, again, it doesn't matter whether you're saying, oh, well, it goes into Social Security and then comes out the other end as benefits, or if it goes into a bank and comes out the other end as a loan to somebody else. Either way, what you're really promising is that at some point in the future, a legal document will determine who pays you how much money when. Okay, and so the way the U.S. system works, I mean, I like talking about the public versus private, but I also don't like talking about the public versus private because as a macroeconomist, they're more similar than they are different to me. And I think that people start to there's this term fetishizing the public-private distinction, right? And I think that feeds into it, but we almost can't help but feed into it, particularly because again, unless and I would never advocate this, but unless we said not only are we going to stop subsidizing 401ks and all our equivalents of super stuff, but it will be a crime to save for your retirement. Right, unless we did that, people who have the money to save will save it, right? And good on them. That's my bottom line.
They're certainly saying in Australia that we should abolish super. It's tantamount to heresy for a former Prime Minister Keating, who introduced it, and was still the subject of adulation. Particular sectors of the population. But I mean, there have been some important policy think tanks, the Grattan Institute is one, which have said, okay, stop now. We do not have to keep continuing the contributions, raising the contributions to super. We should be capping the benefits. We should be capping the contributions. It might have a role to play. It's there in the system already,
Right.
It's been going for 30 years, but let's not expand it, right? Let's just let it do its job. And leave other things as they be available, rather than expanding that system.
That sounds
and
good.
I think there's something to be said for that.
Yeah, I mean, again, I don't do nuance, and so the sort of the political transition idea. It's easy enough for me to say, all right, just stop what you're doing and do what I'm telling you to do, like tomorrow. That's not going to happen. And I will add one other thing that Miranda commented that your non-super income support is funded out of general tax revenues. That's another misdirect on the part of the Roosevelt administration, because again, it's all money going in and out of the federal government. And so even leaving aside the trust funds, which didn't exist until the 80s, the idea that you're saying, okay, so there's the Social Security Administration, and they're taking money in and they're sending money out, and they're not really part of the United States Treasury Department. Yes, they are. Right. So in one way or another, we are talking about using government funds to support retirement savings. But this is one of the most successful optical illusions that you've ever created, because people, even if they don't think that they have a private savings account, they do feel like they have a
beneficial interest or something. Like this is a trust fund, and I'm a beneficiary.
Right.
I contributed, and therefore I get something.
That's right. I paid in. I was promised that I would get money out. It's not welfare. It's not a subsidy. It's me getting my money back. Right. So yeah.
So I've got a question in our last 1 minute, and this is, I don't know the answer to this question. So when someone is paid in payroll over their working life, let's say we take some of their Social Security payment that's coming out of the system, and then they die.
Mm-hmm.
They can't leave any amount to their heirs.
That's right.
It's not able to be a subject of a bequest.
That's right. Social Security ends at death.
It ends at death, and that would be the same for our pension. Of course, what we would think of as Social Security rights, your entitlement to income support from the government.
Right.
Of course, it doesn't continue, after you're dead. It doesn't pass on to your anyway.
Right.
On the other hand, superannuation in Australia, and I assume Roth IRAs and stuff are the same. These are these pools of savings that can be left to beneficiaries.
Right.
And in Australia, unlike the US, we do not have savings.
your estate tax threshold is very high.
Yeah,
Anyway.
we essentially don't have one.
So you sort of don't anymore, but we're building these pools
Yeah.
of inheritance essentially.
Yeah.
Sessional.
Yeah. And honestly, I mean, this is just a policy preference. I don't think the government should be involved in getting and helping people create and pass on large pool with large sums of money. I mean, that's just not, I mean, I honestly, like, I think we should have a real estate tax.
Right,
that it actually is.
And in fact, if you save, of course, why not be able to leave a bequest, but why should we have these very substantial tax concessions whereby the rest of the population is
Right.
essentially subsidizing your saving for,
Exactly.
for the inheritance of your heirs?
And I'll add one more thing that your question brings up. Social Security, you know, you'll get some anti-Social Security ideologues who will say, oh, look, I could have taken the amount of money that I pay in Social Security taxes and put it into, you know, this like really like crypto, like before crypto
Right.
died. You know, I could have put it in and I could have made so much money. But the problem is that, I mean, first of all, they cherry pick, but even beyond that, Social Security is an inflation protected life annuity. And if you, there's also a survivor's insurance and there's a disability insurance part, it's all part of Social Security. And honest academic research has been done. I emphasize honest because of, you know, a lot of the stuff that they're responding to is dishonest, has been done that there's either no or a thin private market alternative to recreate through non-government sources these various things, and in particular the lifetime inflation protected. It turns out that there's behavioral economic reasons why those markets don't work, and it's not because the government forbids them. The government actually tries to encourage them, but they fail. You know, there's market failure. And so it turns out that Social Security system does things that the private markets don't do and wouldn't do.
Which is sort of a classic of government, really, isn't it?
Exactly.
Well, look, I think we'll need to call it to an end. Thank you very much, Neil, for
Thank
a
you.
really interesting seminar.